Jeddah Corniche circuit may not have quite as many finessey corners as, say, Suzuka, as we said in the video yesterday. What it does generate, however, is a pressure cooker, particularly going into qualifying, partly because of the proximity of the walls, partly because those S's are so quick, partly because there are lots of chicanes and heavy braking into those chicanes, and partly because there's so many things that can go wrong there in terms of traffic and obviously making a mistake. The curbs are vicious. And the pressure mounted going into Q3. Until then, Lando Norris, who of course this weekend needed to reassert himself in the McLaren team after that resounding victory by Oscar Piastri last weekend. Lando had a good weekend in Jeddah so far. He was quick yesterday and he was quick in FP3. Q1, though, Oscar Piastri was slightly quicker, and I thought there was a telling moment when Oscar went back into the garage after that lap, and Lando stayed out and did another quick lap and went slightly quicker than Oscar. To me, that was Lando just wanting to reassert himself in the McLaren team. I'm sure McLaren will say, oh no, we were trying something else, or Lando wanted to try something. But it was a telling moment. He didn't need to do that. He only had to be in the top 15 in Q1. Anyway, the pressure was now building. Lando did well in Q2. Q3 now, Oscar goes out first on track ahead of Lando. So the pressure is on Lando in a way to do the time, because in theory, the track will be a little bit quicker when he does his lap. Oscar put together a very, very good lap, even though as he came out of the last corner, already there were signs that it was a yellow zone and then it went to red. So he just got that lap in as the track went full red with Lando Norris hitting the wall, turn 4, turn 5. It's a 180 kilometer an hour entry into that section, 7th gear down to 5th. Interesting that Oscar was actually 5 kilometers an hour quicker going through that kink, the very, very fast turn 4 entry going into turn 5. And that suggests to me that Lando didn't have the tyres quite up to temperature at this point. He actually hit the brakes before he started to lose it, whereas Oscar went through just feathering the throttle, not touching the brakes at all. Lando hits the brakes. Maybe there's some load changes on the car then. But then Lando makes 2 big mistakes, both of which come under the heading of pressure. One is that he is now going in too deep on tyres that won't take it. Instead of letting the car run wide onto a bit of road, I have to say, in fairness to Lando, which he probably hasn't used at any stage this weekend, a lot of drivers have, he tries to fight the car with a little bit of steering correction, bounces over the curb, and then the curb just takes control of the car and whips it over to the other side into the wall. And that's the other mistake, the big mistake, even worse mistake, I think, that Lando made, and that is that he didn't take his hands off the steering wheel as he hit the wall. I can't believe that he did that. I mean, did he not see what happened to Daniel Ricciardo at Zandvoort a couple of years ago? I mean, this was a major mistake. And not to be thinking that way, to me, does come under the heading of pressure. But it wasn't over then, because there was still a qualifying session to run. Lando was obviously going to start 10th. And in a car this good, even though he says it's not a rocket ship, I can assure you it is. In a car this good, he should finish at least 4th, if not on the podium tomorrow. Assuming, of course, he survives all the first and second lap accidents, which probably will occur with all those chicanes and high-speed braking points at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. But we still had a qualifying to run. In theory, it was going to be Oscar Piastri, who now took the pole. A big, big step forward again for him in his status within the McLaren team, in the points that he's now able to score this weekend. A big moment for Oscar. But first of all, George Russell went out in the Mercedes. He'd had a little bit of a difficult practice yesterday, as I said, but Mercedes looked very good today, pretty good in FP3 as well. And George went out and got the temporary pole, as good a lap as could be driven in the way George drives those laps, on the absolute ragged edge of what is feasible. No short corners from George, right on the edge, but more or less a perfect lap. Really impressive to watch. And then Oscar Piastri responded and went quicker still. And now it's Max Verstappen. He was out on track last. He'd already done one very quick lap. And given the amount of time that had been lost with the red and the yellow, for Red Bull, it was virtually a racing pit stop. Straight in, new set of tyres, and Max straight out again. And he did the time. He got the tyres absolutely perfect for Sector 1, something he didn't do on his first run. And then he just fell into a rhythm that is absolute classic. Max Verstappen is actually yellow in terms of not matching his personal bests in sectors 2 and 3, but he has the top speed, as we said yesterday, and he got the pole for Red Bull. Amazing achievement. I don't know, I'd be willing to bet that in the last, 5 minutes of Q3, Max's pulse rate was probably 20 to 30 beats less than anybody else on track. And on top of that, the thought occurs that it's much easier for Max to drive that way on the absolute limit of what the car can do in harmony with the car than it is for him to drive slowly. It's just what he does. And it's what he does under pressure. And he alone, I think, was an absolute standout under pressure today, under the pressure imposed by this daunting, torrid circuit. Fabulous pole lap. Whether Lando, if he'd got it together perfectly, would have beaten him, we'll never know. But of course, the problem is the way Lando drives, and to some extent the way Oscar drives. We'll get on to Oscar and George in a second. But the way Lando drives, he doesn't allow himself the same margin for error as Max does, as I've been explaining many, many times. Max with these short corners, and because of the finesse he has in terms of what he can do with the steering, the throttle and the brakes mid-corner, the rotation points he finds and the harmony he feels with the surface of the road, every corner is slightly different one from another. He's always adjusting the car. He's always allowing for something to happen. Whereas with Lando, and I think even more so with George, and to some extent with Oscar, what they're committed to is what they're committed to. And if it's not right, it's never going to be right. And that's the difference between Max and George and Lando today. Oscar too is right on the edge. He's not going near short corners as he did at the beginning of his McLaren career. But he's not touching the edge as quite as spikily, as harshly as George Russell. And that's the slight difference. But every lap Oscar did, there was a small mistake, a little bit running, a little bit too wide here, a little bit too quick into here. And the only way he could compensate for it was to use a little bit more road or just to back away a little bit. Whereas Max was, you couldn't see a single error in Max's driving, even though for sure he was making some, but he was correcting them inside the envelope in which he was operating. And that was the difference. Just wonderful to watch. And a pole certainly that I don't think anyone would have predicted based on the speed yesterday. Although we did mention with the speed traps yesterday how quick the Red Bull was in a straight line, how slow the McLaren was. And I wrote that off by saying, glibly wrote it off by saying, well, that just shows how much downforce the McLaren had got. But of course, what it does add up to is in qualifying under pressure, Max knew that he didn't need to put the car on the absolute edge in sectors 2 or 3 because he had that substantial advantage in top speed going into the last corner. And that was really good work by Max. It was just a question of getting the tyres perfect at the beginning of the lap for Sector 1, where you can gain quite a lot of time. And then Sector 2, as I say, it's all about commitment and just hoping you're not going to find a slow car in the middle of a corner. So, wow, yeah, Max Verstappen on pole. For sure, the McLaren-Mercedes is a better race car than the Red Bull. And it's going to be difficult over a race distance for Max in the world of DRS to win tomorrow. He can do it, for sure. Things can happen to others, and Max can do it. Of course, he's good enough, and for sure the car is quick enough from that position. But in terms of the best race car, have no doubt that it is still the McLaren. And P4, Charles Leclerc, absolutely on the edge, just like George Russell in the Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton saying yesterday he doesn't know how Charles drives the car with so much oversteer. You don't see the oversteer in Charles. The point is it's a relatively loose back end because Ferrari don't know how to have a decent back end. They haven't had one for 5 years, as I said yesterday. But Charles makes maximum use of that back end to do what he wants with the front of the car. And I have to confess, I always thought that's what Lewis would do when he got to Ferrari, when he relaxed, when he got there. But he hasn't. He's still trying to drive the car, leaving wide entries going in, hoping that he's going to feel something on the rear and get on the power at that point. It's what Kimi Antonelli is doing in the Mercedes as well, interestingly enough. Ironically enough, he's leaving a lot of margin. He's waiting much too long for the weight transfer, as Lewis appears to be when you watch him on track now, compared with Charles Leclerc. And it was difficult. I mean, Lewis just scraped through into Q3. He was P10 in Q2. And if you want more irony, it's that Lewis Hamilton was out-qualified today, not only by the young rookie that replaced him at Mercedes, who's driving in a pretty similar way right now, but also by Carlos Sainz, the driver who was sacked by Ferrari. I don't know how many times I said over the window that I felt it was completely wrong that Ferrari should break up what was then a very, very good driver pairing between Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, and that Carlos did not deserve to be sacked. And dare I say, I think I've been proved correct because there he is in the Williams now. I mean, he must be the happiest guy in Saudi Arabia right now, I think, Carlos Sainz, to have out-qualified Lewis Hamilton this way again. Yuki Tsunoda did a pretty good job to be P8 for Red Bull. At least he's there now, getting into Q3. That'll give him confidence, particularly as he now seems to have stopped that weird transitory curve thing going into the last corner. And he could score some decent points tomorrow, I think, in the other car. Pierre Gasly was under pressure, but delivered when he had to in Q1 and Q2. Very good job again in the Alpine Renault. And of course, Lando Norris starts P10 in the McLaren-Mercedes after that shunt. And now let's have another quick look at that black and gold Lotus 98T Renault, Ayrton Senna's car from the 1986 season. His race engineer was Steve Hallam, and Steve, incredible career really. Started with Nigel Mansell, then Ayrton Senna at Lotus, and then went to McLaren where he was race engineer for Mika Hakkinen and Kimi Räikkönen. So you can say he's kind of run the full gamut. And here he is capturing, I think, a lot of the mood of the time at Team Lotus, and what impact Ayrton Senna made when he joined the team, and what it was like working with him when he was winning those races. for Team Lotus. Steve Hallam.
Those cars all had fundamentally similar characteristics, just getting better from model to model. So they were easy for an engineer to set up. We had like 3 different front springs, 2 different rear springs. We'd balanced the car on the bars, and aerodynamically it was very efficient. And the engine, Renault's qualifying engines were very strong. The race engines were probably not as strong as the Hondas, but certainly Ayrton was a major compensation in that. The consumption wasn't
right.
as good as perhaps what we wanted.
What was the key or most important thing in terms of setup for Ayrton?
It was always balance. Always balance. In reality, it was about, the races in those days were about maximizing your engine performance over the course of the race due to the fuel tank limitation.
Yeah.
And so we were keen on the outright performance of the car, and the balance of the car was generally easy to find. Very rarely did we struggle, but it was about getting the car to have good race pace. In other words, not have to wind the engine down too much relative to the others to actually get to the end of the race, but also have pace during that period of time. He had the most delicate. He was able to make the cars in that era had a huge amount of horsepower or performance, engine performance, and therefore you could very easily destroy the rear tires if you wanted. His throttle technique, which has been well documented, I think not only enabled him to manage the balance of the car, but also enabled him to preserve the tires as well. So I would say you could go nearer to neutral with him than other drivers, and he would make the difference up himself by his touch.
Steve now doing a very good job with the Toyota Racing Division in North America, running the GT3 and GT4 programs. So big thanks to him, and all the best to him for his 2025 racing season. We'll have more of that chat tomorrow, but in the meantime, remember, you can order your personal Lotus 98T REC watch using materials from the actual car raced by Ayrton in the watch. Details in the description below this video. And so we go into the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix with Max Verstappen on the pole for Red Bull. Just amazing, his achievements today. As I say, pulse rate probably, I don't know, what, 95, I would think, on that pole lap, something like that. The guy's just so good, and he's getting better all the time. And one of the great things, I think, about the 2025, whether Max wins, loses, or draws, is that we are seeing Max in an inferior car now. And it's always wonderful to see these great drivers in a car that isn't the best out there, and how Max makes the best of this RB21, and how he pulls it up from where it was on Friday with the team to getting the pole on Saturday afternoon is just wondrous to watch. So we'll be back tomorrow as we look at the 5th round of the FIA Formula One World Championship. See you then.